Ladies and gentlemen, Charles Hanagriff is from Franklin, Louisiana. He played football for Hanson. How about that for an intro, Charlie?
It's the first time I've been introduced as a former player in quite some time, Jock. Thanks.
Not to get in the weeds real quick, at the Bayou Bash years back, Charles was bringing me up on stage to do some segment, and Charles said, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the very best sportscaster." And I'm thinking, this is quite an intro, from North Vermilion High School.
And you were. You were. Nobody's topped you since.
I don't think so. I haven't heard of it. So definitely not the best athlete, that's for sure. Sat on the bench the whole time there. All right, Charlie. So very interesting press conference Sunday night. Scott Woodward, the AD, and Ed Orgeron sharing a stage as head coach is going out. Typically, when the coach is fired, there's a press release. There's a couple of quotes. "I enjoyed my time there," blah, blah, blah. What did you make of that on Sunday night?
It was a little bit surreal. You had two people that are having to part ways in a very high profile manner. And it was just uncomfortable for the two of them, I think, to be there together. Now, having said that, I think Ed Orgeron acted relieved about the situation coming to some kind of finality, some kind of conclusion, even if it does have him sort of in a lame duck status for 6 weeks. But you don't often see that, but you might see it some more, Jacques. The timeline has been accelerated so much because of the early signing period. You're looking for coaches earlier than you ever have. And these things are not done in secret anymore. They're done in a very, very public manner. So if USC is looking for a coach or LSU is looking for a coach, you're going to see that process start a lot earlier than you did even 3 or 4 years ago. And the early signing date has got a lot to do with that.
Yeah, the importance of the recruiting class, and that's a short-term thing. That's not a long-term thing, but we know that Louisiana's got we know Louisiana always has talent, but this year it's off the charts. So certainly they want to protect those 22 or whatever commitments and get a new coach in place to make that transition and move forward.
They do. I don't know how much it helps them in the interim. They talked about Coach O continuing to recruit for LSU until the end of the season, and I'm sure he will, as will the staff. But everybody that they're recruiting knows that they won't be back. That's been made public now. And I would be surprised if you had very many players signing on or committing to LSU before they know who the next coach is going to be. And you can't tell them that right now. So I think at best you're hoping for an as expected, a hold on to what you have, because those guys committed to the school before you. They've already lost one recruit. But the flip side of that is when they do hire a coach, you'll probably get some kids that they hadn't been recruiting before. The new coach will come in with prior relationships with kids that might not have been considering LSU. So it'll even out, or you hope it will even out. But the interim time in between that is uncomfortable.
Yeah, and before we talk about possible replacements, the fact that Ed Orgeron is going to coach 5 more games and navigate an open date as well. As you and I talked about, Jerry DiNardo, when he was out, "Hey, Hal Hunter coached this game, get us out of here." I think Curly Hallman, when he was fired, he coached his final 2 games and they started winning back then. And then Les Miles fired 4 games into 2016. You bring in Ed Orgeron, who was much, much different in terms of the way they practiced and the energy he brought in the press conferences and all those different kind of things. But this kind of feels like not a whole lot changes. It's still the same guy.
It doesn't. They're not changing offensive philosophies like they did in 2016, or just play callers, really not, anything more than that. They had the stuff in the playbook. They just wouldn't call it. So when they changed, you saw a very noticeable change with that very first game against Missouri. You won't see, I'd be surprised if you saw that this time. It's a matter of everybody getting to the finish line as best they can. You've got a head coach who's, said, I don't really want to coach next year, so I think he can focus on this job. But you have an entire staff of coaches that have to plan for their futures, their 2022 futures. And I'm sure that the kids on the current roster are hearing from other schools that would love to see them enter the transfer portal. So it's very much a keep your arms around your program as much you can in this interim time until the end of November, when you can name a new coach.
And if you're Scott Woodward, are you kind of thinking, man, this is this is kind of a painful root canal over these next whatever, but man, once I make it out of it and get my coach into place, we've seen that how much the landscape at LSU has changed. Charlie Wright, Nicky Fargas out, Kim Mulkey in, Paul Maneri out, Jay Johnson in, even Dede Bro retired along the way. Now a new football coach, Scott Woodward, really making his mark at LSU in terms of hires and changing the whole landscape out there.
Yeah, and John, this is such a good job. I mean, even if you have some external factors, and certainly they are right now, that would say, you know what, there's some problems there. I mean, they've got a Title IX lawsuit. They've got a coaching change that goes over a much longer period of time than what you would normally see. But even with that, this is still such a good job. You know, I was thinking this morning when we were getting ready to do this about the first coaching search I covered here, which was Curly Holman to Jerry DiNardo. And at that time, this job was not desirable. I mean, the number of people that not just told them no, but I'm not interested at all, other than maybe getting myself a raise where I am, was staggering. I mean, at that time, programs like Colorado and Syracuse and BYU and Kansas State were all in much better shape than LSU. I don't think you put any of those schools in the same stratosphere. Now LSU is being mentioned as a better job than USC or Penn State. And that certainly wasn't the case 25 years ago. So even with the uncomfortable, lag period here between when Ed Orgeron has been dismissed and a new coach is hired, this is still a plum job. I mean, as good as it gets.
All right, let's talk about possible candidates. I'm going to start here because there are probably not many people that are as good as knowing the dynamic of Baton Rouge and Lafayette as the two guys that are sitting here talking to you right now on this podcast, right? So we know that a lot of Raging Cajun people feel like LSU is snotty. They think they're better than us. They're arrogant. And we know a lot of LSU people think that Raging Cajun people think they're bigger than what they are, and they are annoying and agitate us. The head coach at the Raging Cajuns, Billy Napier. I had a great talk with Matt Malk yesterday, and he says Billy Napier is a perfect fit for this job. Matt Malk has been around Nick Saban. He talks about Napier, how well organized he is, how driven, how focused he is. And LSU may not hire Billy Napier, but I feel fairly confident to say that he is going to be a star at a bigger school down the road. What say you?
He's already turned down some jobs at Power 5 conferences, and I suspect he will be a Power 5 head coach very, very shortly. So I agree with you. But I'd be surprised if he were the next LSU coach. We know that Scott Woodward is going to search for the biggest names. And while Napier has a terrific record, it's not at a school in a Power 5 conference. I don't think that should eliminate him, nor do I think that he should be eliminated or looked over because he coaches at a program in your state that is not at your level financially or conference-wise or whatever. We sort of went through this back in 1998 when DiNardo had first started his downslide, and Tommy Bowden at Tulane had gone undefeated. And there was very much a sentiment then where LSU will never hire Tulane's coach. And they were right. It didn't matter how good he was. And Bowden didn't do as well at Clemson. But my point is that I think some guys get eliminated just because of where they are now. I think that's a mistake. I think you should look at everybody. I think they should take a long look at a guy like Billy Napier or Jamie Chadwell. Clemson is coaching with a guy that they hired off as an assistant. So is Ohio State. So is Georgia. You can look at assistant coaches. You can look at coaches at smaller schools. There's some really, really good qualified coaches there. But I doubt that's the direction LSU is going to go in.
I'm going to bring up this name, somebody that I respect, and the media brought this name up. It's not somebody I've really talked about or thought about. I think you talked about him. I'll listen to your podcast, by the way. Check out the Hannycast with Charles Hanagriff there. Mark Stoops over at Kentucky seems like a no-nonsense guy, and the previous two coaches at LSU have been described to kind of be characters. Some might even say a little cartoonish, and Les Miles and Ed Orgeron. Stoops, the times I've seen him at SEC Media Days and other times, a little dry, but as somebody told me, good. I just want a guy that can win. Now in Kentucky, His record overall is not fantastic, but it is Kentucky football. They stuck with him through some tough times in the beginning. Now he's winning pretty well at Kentucky. They are still not in Georgia's class, as we saw this past weekend. But if he's done what he's done at Kentucky, could he have great success at LSU?
He could, but I doubt that that's the direction that they'll go in either. Mark Stoops has been at Kentucky for 9 years. This will be his second winning season in the league. And while he could take that and catapult it into great success at LSU, it's hard for me to see LSU at this point taking a national championship coach and replacing him with a guy that's had 7 losing seasons out of 8 in the Southeastern Conference. I know it's Kentucky. I get that. But I think they're looking for something different. I don't think that's the kind of statement that Scott Woodward's going to make. It's hard for me to see Scott Woodward getting up after introducing Jay Johnson, introducing Kim Mulkey, introducing a coach that has a losing record. Now, not this year, but overall.
All right, let's talk big fish, since Scott Woodward is a big game hunter, as we know. And Kim Mulkey, the ultimate testament of that, at least his time at LSU so far. So Jimbo Fisher, it seems like they've done that dance, and maybe he's settling in at Texas A&M, although there's a relationship there. Somebody brought up a good point. Scott Woodward has already pulled off Jimbo Fisher. Would he really want to pull it off again, right? Wants to do something different. Dabo Sweeney, could they offer him $8-9 million come here? I don't think Dabo Sweeney's stick would play here, Charles. I don't know about you, but and why would he leave Clemson where it's easier to win there, unless he wants to really get in there and scrap with Saban and Jimbo and whatnot? You brought up James Franklin, and there will be talk about should LSU hire a minority coach. I loved your lines on your podcast. It would be an insult to James Franklin or Mel Tucker to say, hey, we're hiring you because you're an African-American. It'd be an insult to tell them, we're not hiring you because you're an African-American. Hire the best guy. But James Franklin, a lot of talk about him going to USC right now anyway, right?
There is. Let me take those in order. I think for Jimbo Fisher will be like that person that, you had an attraction to, but the timing never worked out. That person that you were never able to connect with because the timing of it just never worked out. I think Fisher would have loved to have been the coach at LSU at one point in his life, and I think there's a point where LSU would have loved to have had him. I think that time has passed, and there's $100 million, right? $100 million on the table. While LSU is going to come with a big checkbook, they're not going to top that number by any significant means. So it would be about pull, and I think that time has passed. I have no reason why Dabo Sweeney would leave Clemson to come to LSU. They're not going to top that number by a whole lot either. And you brought up a good point. He's in a better situation there. Furthermore, if Nick Saban were to retire tomorrow, I'd be surprised if Dabo Sweeney took the Alabama job where he is from, just because, my goodness, how much better are you going to do than you have it at Clemson? They're going to erect a statue to you there. James Franklin is interesting. I'm a little bit surprised that he's on these lists. For LSU or USC, you're talking about a coach with 3 top 10 finishes in 6 full years as the coach there. He's in the top 10 again this year. He is from Pennsylvania. This is, by all accounts, his dream job. So why is he? And he's making $5.5 million with a long-range contract that is going to pay him upwards of $1 million more than that by the time it's over with. Why is he on these lists? There has been a little bit of reluctance by Penn State to make some facilities upgrades. They are in the process of doing that. But for whatever reason, Franklin's allowed his name to go out there. And if he's willing to move from Penn State, then I think he is as good a coach. He's got the best overall resume of anybody you can realistically hire. And I think that the fact that his name is still out there and he hasn't even issued a non-denial leads me to believe that he's at least a little bit interested. So is the LSU job better than the USC job? Overall, I'd say it is, but maybe beauty's in the eye of the beholder a little bit there. The USC job it should be the Clemson of the West. I mean, we've seen USC when they're really rolling. I'm very intrigued by James Franklin's candidacy anywhere other than Penn State. And if he's willing to move, I think you got to give that. I think you got to give that everything you got.
Well said. Appreciate it. Couple more things. A name I brought up in the beginning just because I glanced at his resume and I knew that he had been at Alabama coaching with Saban and given LSU fits recruiting, and also had a great background in offensive lineman, where LSU obviously has been lacking, as well as Mario Cristobal over at Oregon. Some people have told me he's a bit like Ed Orgeron, and that he's a CEO type. He may not be a great mind. He delegates offense and defense and kind of plays the role of motivator or coaching offensive line. I'm a little unprepared talking about Cristobal. I just thought that from what I saw, he might be a impressive hire.
Cristobal's a good coach. I don't know that he's got as much of a track record as some of the other candidates that we've talked about. Mm-hmm. His record prior to Oregon was nothing overwhelming. Now he's done a very good job there. He's brought them back. They could still possibly end up in the playoff this year, which is another problem, by the way. Yes. Coaches that are going to be in the playoff, be it Luke Fickell or James Franklin or Mel Tucker or whoever, the playoff is a problem, because if the coach is going to be in the playoff, I don't know how the timing works out to hire him. And Cristobal could fall into that category. I don't see it as the direction they're going to go, which is not to say that Cristobal is not qualified. He is, but I would be surprised if he were the choice. I think there are better resumes that they can hire.
All right, last one. We could talk about a million people, and I'm sure somebody watching this is saying, "Why didn't you talk about this guy, that guy?" We'll cover it all. I think as I'm sitting here with Charlie, we're like 3 or 4 days into this thing, and it's the best job in the world. But I'm already exhausted, Charlie. This is going to be something. Each coaching search is more intense and more crazy than the previous, it feels like. But Dave Aranda, who coached at LSU, kind of a defensive genius, certainly a guy who made halftime adjustments, right? How many times did we see LSU struggle in the first half on defense? Second half, they turn it around and shut down the opposing team. This is only his second year at Baylor. He would be a 180 from Ed Orgeron in terms of demeanor, instead of all the rah-rah and he's so measured. He's so calculated. We're both Star Wars fans. He's a Jedi, so to speak. What are your thoughts on Dave Aranda? Not he wouldn't be a big splash, would he?
Probably not. He is as solid a football mind as you're going to find. He's off to a very, very strong start at Baylor. I'm going to throw the COVID year out. I'm just going to talk about what I've seen from them this year. Is he a dynamic recruiter? He didn't have that reputation when he was here. He's off to a good start at Baylor. I think that'd be one of the questions that you'd have with him. But ultimately, I think that would work itself out. I think Dave Aranda would do a great job here. Again, is Scott Woodward going to go to the? Is he going to go to Is he going to go to the podium and introduce a guy that has 2 years as a head coach? I think probably not. And that's not to say that I don't think Dave Aranda is going to do a good job. I think he's already doing a good job at Baylor, and I think he'll have them. As with Oklahoma and Texas leaving the Big 12, Big Dog supremacy is up for grabs in what'll be the new Big 12. Baylor's as good a choice as anybody to assume that. So he's in a pretty good spot.
All right. Charles Hanagriff, you have listened to him for years on different radio stations, and you have called in his post-game shows. Maybe sometimes you had a few beers, maybe you didn't. But Charlie, keep up the great work. Check out the podcast Charlie's doing, and we'll talk to you soon, buddy.
Thanks, JD.